All right. Good evening, church. Good evening. Hope everybody's doing good this afternoon. I've been looking forward to talking to you guys. If you want to turn in your Bibles to Romans chapter 12, that's where we'll be here in just a little bit. Romans 12. But first, I was going to tell you a little story. So I've been going to this weekly lunch with a few friends, some guys, different backgrounds, but it's supposed to be a lunch where we also have a Bible study and we talk about spiritual things. And because it's an eclectic group and there's a lot of different perspectives, we hear some interesting things and have some interesting conversations. And I think it's good. But there's this one guy who he always makes me laugh because he's that guy that he doesn't filter his thoughts, you know? He's like the guy that if he thinks you look like you got dressed in the dark, he's going to tell you, you know? Anyway, he grew up in, as far as I understand it, he grew up in a non-denominational church context, but he doesn't go anywhere anymore. And so I get the impression that this lunch is probably the only time that he really gets poured into spiritually. And so we got on the subject of talking about going to and being part of a church. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but I tried to write down kind of what his response was when we got on that subject. So this is what he said. I don't see the point in going to church. I can't really tell the difference between people who go to church and people who don't in their day-to-day life. So why would I bother? I already have enough friends. Plus, it'll add a bunch of obligations, especially on my day off. So, I told you, he's that guy. It's pretty jarring, you know. And we had a good conversation that followed that. But a lot of things kind of came to my mind when I heard that. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot since then. So, just want to say right off the bat, I think he's dead wrong. And I think that's important to lead with, especially for those that are younger in here. I want you guys to know that being here and being a part of this body matters. So that needs to be first and foremost, and I'm going to have more on that in a second. But there is something about what he said that bothered me, and I had to think about why it bothered me, and I guess the conclusion I came to is that it bothered me because he's not alone in that view. There's a lot of people who feel that way. And I'll bet you know quite a few. Maybe in your family. Maybe people who you love dearly who grew up in coming to church and just have a cynical view now. And as much as I hate to say it, there is a little bit of truth in what he had to say that bothered me too. Let me explain. So I do think that it is true that there are people who claim to wear the name of Christ, who outside of these walls look no different from your average person. I hope that's not said of anyone here. I hope that's not said of me, but I think it is true. And I think you could argue if someone goes to church, you know, it's easy to know whether or not somebody's a church-going person in our culture today. And then I started thinking, well, how do you know that? How do you figure that out? You know, oftentimes it's, you know, where do you go to church, right? You could ask that question. You ask that question, not only are you going to find out if the person goes to church, but also where they go to church, and you're going to imply that you go to church, right? So that's one way that we can let people know. And people let other people know in various ways that they are followers of Jesus or believers. Other common ways, I think, you know, when a hot button issue comes up, people can weigh in and say, kind of from a Christian perspective, what they think. Or sometimes when we realize there's a sinful situation, we need to show up disapproval. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Like, that's good. If we do handle those kinds of things in the right way, then all of that's fine. I love hearing somebody tell me to have a blessed day just as much as the next guy, right? There's something about that. There's a bond, I think. But if those are the only things, in the only ways in which we look different from the rest of the world around us, I think there might be a problem there. So I don't think those are the kinds of interactions that Peter had in mind when he was saying that we need to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks us to give a reason for the hope that is in us, right? Peter was expecting that people who followed Jesus, disciples in the church, would be so different that people would be compelled to talk to us about it proactively. They couldn't help but notice how strangely different and peculiar this group of people are. In other words, people should never be asking, why aren't you any different? They should be asking, why are you so different, right? And I think part of the challenge here is it depends on somebody's perception and what context they grow up in. There's a lot of broken people, a lot of people who have been hurt in church contexts. Most people you talk to, Christian and non-Christian alike, want to be seen as good people, right? So I think that also adds to some of the confusion. A lot of people have the mistaken idea that church is just kind of a Jesus, excuse me for saying this because it's kind of jarring, but a lot of people think that church is just a Jesus-themed social club where you go and get some training on how to be a good person. Unfortunately, even some people's experience in the past has been exactly that. And that's not the experience that we read about in our New Testament. That's not transformation. That's not the description of a real family. So to steal a line from F. LaGard Smith, he says that idea of church takes it from being a living organism and turns it into an organization. I really like that. So being in a church, being a part of a church, shouldn't feel pointless. It should never be pointless. And I think it's so sad that many people feel that way. There's so much that my friend at this lunch is missing out on because he's not part of a body, of this body. And I am aware that I'm talking to the Sunday night crowd right now. So I know you guys don't need it, too much convincing, but I just want to remind us what being a part of this family brings to us. You guys are my family's support. You keep me spiritually fed. You train my kids. When someone is sick, you're there. We're there for each other. When I feel like I'm losing focus on the things in my life that should matter, and I come here, it changes my whole mindset. I'm renewed. It reminds me of that passage in Hebrews 10 where he says that in the church we should consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. That's a really encouraging passage. And I feel like sometimes when people have the wrong idea about church, they really hone in on that part that's not neglecting to meet together. That's not a bad obligation. It's a joy to be part of that, to be a part of a family that makes you feel so connected and loved and draws you nearer to the Savior. And you guys know this, but I want my friend to know what it is like to be part of a living organism. About living or being part of a living body and how amazing it is when the talents all combine together and you see that the synergy that comes from that. So when I heard my friend say this, I don't remember exactly how the conversation went afterward. Like I said, I think it was a good conversation, but as I was, you like have an interaction like that and you're like, oh man, I should have said, I always think about when Nathanael was skeptical about Jesus when Philip was inviting him to come listen to Jesus speak. Do you remember what he said? It's very simple. Come and see. I just want my friend to come and see. So one day, note my optimism, one day my friend is going to say, okay, I'll come and see. And then I want him to walk in and immediately see something different about this family, about this body. And I think he will. But I want to ask the question tonight. It's a very long lead-in. But in Romans chapter 12, I want to ask from the text, how should we look different? How should a Christian look different? And I want to also say, I know what a big topic that is. How should a Christian look different, right? It would be incredibly naive of me to think I could cover all of that in a series of sermons, let alone a quick Sunday night message. So we're not going to try to cover everything. We're not going to boil the ocean tonight. My goal is just simply to bring to mind this idea of our spiritual transformation as a continuing process and have us as a family, as a body, start, and continue to have that conversation about how we can do that more and more and effectively. To put it simply, how are we going to look different? We need to look like our rabbi, Jesus. So Romans chapter 12, read with me, starting in verse 1. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Okay, so we'll just take this apart. Did you notice what he said our spiritual worship is? It's not actually what I normally think of when I think about worship, but there at the end of verse 1, he says this is your spiritual worship. What is it? He says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. A living sacrifice. What does that mean? Well, I want to focus on two of the words that he uses here. So the first one is body, as in your physical body. So, I think by that, Paul is trying to let us know that our walk with Jesus is going to demand more than just mental agreement, right? As my friend Eric Dada, I don't think he's here tonight, but as he would say, you're going to have to burn some calories. So he wants us, we need to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Sacrifice is the second word that I wanted to hone in on here. I would have been a lot more comfortable if Paul had said to present my body as a living volunteer, or a living service, servant, which is still biblical. But that's not the word he used here. He says, I need to be a living sacrifice. When you think of the word sacrifice, what do you think of? Giving things up, right? It's painful, even to the point of death. Giving up things, giving up whatever it takes, sacrificially. In other words, if I want to walk with the rabbi, I need to be willing to go as far as the rabbi would go, because he was the ultimate sacrifice. It might cost me everything. It cost him everything. So in the second verse, we see, he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And this was actually the part of this section that made me, think of my friend's comment. Like I said earlier, too many professing Christians today are so conformed to this world that really they're indistinguishable from it. So what is Paul saying here is the solution? Be transformed. How are you going to be transformed? It's right there. By the renewal of your mind, okay? Okay, renewing of the mind. So what does that involve? You know, when I think of renewing my mind, there's something about it that there's a part of me that wants to fight against it. Not that I don't like the idea, but when I'm really getting into my day, you know, I got a lot of stuff going on, right? I mean, renewing my mind sounds like it's going to take some time, you know? It sounds like it's going to require me to slow down a lot. Praying, reading my Bible, taking time to reflect and talk to God. Sometimes that's hard. It sounds good, but sometimes it's not easy. I mean, what about my to-do list, you know? What about the kids' practices that we need to get them to? Or what about that meeting tomorrow that I really need to be getting ready for? Or what about that, oh no, I just got a notification. Did you get that too? Reminding me of, you know, all the things I need to be busy with. Turn over to Luke chapter 10 with me for just a second. Speaking of preoccupation, Luke chapter 10, in verse 30, Jesus was speaking to the man who was asking him a question, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he set him on his animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him." You know, it's interesting to me that the two first men that he names, implied in what their titles were, what they were as people, they were busy guys. They were religiously busy guys. They were the kind of guys that probably had stuff to do, you know, had to be somewhere, had a thing, you know. And then the non-Jew, the Samaritan, is the one who is willing to slow down because that's what it took to take care of somebody. I don't think that was on his schedule that day, but he knew that that was the right thing to do. It's hard to slow down sometimes. It's hard to take deliberate time for renewal of the mind. But if I want to be transformed and not conformed, it's going to take some attention. I love this quote: "What you give your attention to is the person you become." Isn't that true? I read another good quote. There's a man named John Mark Comer. He wrote a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and I think I got some thoughts. I know I got some of the thoughts for this lesson from him, but there's a quote in the book, and he says this: "The solution to an overbusy life is not more time, it's to slow down and simplify our lives around what really matters." I love that. Adding more time to my schedule is not going to be the answer. If I want renewal that's going to transform me so that I'm not conformed, it's going to take some sacrifice. Sacrifice in the form of dedicated time to let my mind be renewed. Focusing on what really matters. And then what's that going to lead us to do? Well, next verse, or next part of the verse, "that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." So we need to be the kind of people who can test and discern the will of God. That sounds like it's going to be an active thing, right? I mean, you get outside of these walls and life is complicated, you know? Taking what's in here and then applying it to your situation and the things that are going on in your life is going to take some testing and discernment. Yesterday, we went to the Ranching and Heritage Center, and they have this new exhibit for kids that's Hank the Cow Dog. I don't know if you grew up reading Hank the Cow Dog. I love Hank the Cow Dog. My kids like Hank the Cow Dog, and we read it together sometimes. But they had some ranchers come in from out of town, and they had actual cow dogs in this arena with the cows. And there's all these people crowded around. They've got some stands, and we're all watching, and it's really amazing. And this rancher with all his cow dogs, I mean, they are moving those cattle around, and there's a lot of people talking, a lot of commotion. And that rancher, he just whispered, basically, and those dogs would snap into action. They were tuned in to what their master wanted from them. They knew exactly what to do. And even more than that, he didn't have to tell them what to do when the cow charged. It's not like they were always standing around waiting for instructions from him. They knew what to do. It had taken a lot of training, a lot of time with the master to get to the point where those dogs, I mean, sure, he had specific commands. There are other times they're reacting dynamically in that environment, and they're doing all the right things. It was pretty amazing. I think I'll call this all a bunch of cow dogs. But that's what we need to be. We need to be so tuned in to what the master would want for us that we hear the slightest whisper. And even when we don't, we know what he would say. We know how to react in the environment. And it's going to be complicated. And sometimes it's going to be messy. Not that we'll always get it right or perfect, but if our will is to please the master, we're going to make it. There's another quote that I came to mind as I was preparing for this. There's a writer, Francis Chan. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He has a book, I think it was Letters to the Church, where I read this. And in it, he was talking about he goes and speaks sometimes at other churches or conventions, and sometimes there's a countdown timer to tell him how much time he has left. And he said he likes to pretend that, sometimes he makes it a game in his own mind, he likes to pretend that when the timer ends, his life ends, and he'll be standing in the presence of God. And he said, when I do that, I stop being worried about what other people are going to think by what I have to say. Because the only thing I care about when I really think that is, I want my master to be pleased with what I'm doing today, what I'm saying. I think when we take time in our life for renewal, when we care about what the master has to say, if you start your day with prayer and you're reminded of the presence of God when you leave for the day, he's still with you. You want to please him. You'll care less about what the world has to say because you aren't conformed, you're transformed. I want my friend to come in here, hopefully soon. I want him to learn what it means to be transformed, and I know you, all of us as a family, are going to try to do that for anybody who comes in here. Let's be the kind of people who invite others to come and see, because we all are just in that journey trying to be with our rabbi. So let's hear his voice. Let's be changed by it. If we can do anything for you tonight, if you have any need, I know as a family we want to help you. Let us know if we can pray for you or do anything for you as we stand and sing.